All right, everybody, this video is going to be just a little review here on tables, graphs, equations, and how they're all related to each other. So I know that if I have a graph, I know that I can make a table of values, I can write the equation, and if I have a table of values, I know that I can write the equation and I can sketch the graph. And if I have an equation, I know that I can go ahead and make the graph, and I can also make a table of values. The reason that they're all related is right here, because of the rate of change in initial value, and I can find those pieces from any of the three starting points. So if I'm given the equation, I know I can find that rate of change, initial value, and so on. So this video is going to look at how we are able to find all of this information based on what we're given. Okay, so this time we're given an equation that says sketch the graph and create a table of values. So there's a number of different ways that we can go about this process, but first of all, I'm going to show you just one here. Okay, so we've got our equation here. It says y equals 3 over 2x minus 5. Okay, so when I look at this and I start out, I look at this equation y equals mx plus b. And I know that the b value here is my initial value, and I know that m is the rate of change. So right off the bat, I know I can fill these in. That m, which is the rate of change, is that fraction 3 over 2. Remember, that stands for rise over run. And the b value here is a negative 5, and that's my initial value. And this is where this crosses the y-axis. So if I come over here to my graph, I know that I can start out with my initial value here, which is on the y-axis down here at negative 5. So down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down on the y-axis. And then my rise over my run tells me how to get to my next point. So I'm going to start here at this point, and I'm going to rise 3, and I'm going to run 2. Both of those numbers are positive. So a rise would mean that I'm going up, and that's a positive number. And when I go from 0 over here to the right towards 2, notice that my numbers are getting bigger here. So I know that I have that point. Now I can keep going with my rise and my run from any point that I want to. So I could go from this point, I could go up 1, 2, up 1, 2, 3, and then run 2. And I could just keep on going, 1, 2, 3, run 2. And notice how anytime that I do that, I'm making here a straight line. Up 1, 2, 3, over 2. And I can, at that point, just sketch the graph of my line. And I know that it is going to keep going in that same pattern. Now, I've got my graph done. To make my table, this is pretty straightforward. All I have to do is come over here to my graph, and if I find the coordinates of each of these points, I know that those are x, y values on my table, and each row is going to represent a point. So if I start here at my initial value is at negative 5, I know that this has the coordinates 0, negative 5. So I can come right up here to my table, and I can enter that for my x value and my y value when I plot a point. Now as I keep going, I can just go ahead and label the points that I have. I've got 2, negative 2. And so I can just fill in my table right straight away like as it goes. So my next one is going to be at 4, 1. And then my last point up here is at 6, 4. 6, 4. Now, if we look at our table, just as an example, notice that in this part of my table, my change in my y was a plus 3, and notice over here that my change in x is a plus 2. So notice how that fits right in here with my rate of change that we already knew from our equation, and we knew that to be our rise over our run. So it's all represented here in the same exact thing in the same way. Okay, example number 2 here, it says given a table of values. So this time I'm given a different piece of information. It says sketch the graph, write the equation. Well, here's what I'm going to do if I am given a table of values. I'm going to go ahead and I am going to start out by plotting these points. So each row represents a point that's on my graph. So I know that I have this 2, negative 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got a point right here. I've got the point 3, negative 4. So I'm over here at 3, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I've got 6, and up at 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I've got 8 over here at 11. So I'm up here at 9, 10, 11, somewhere right in there. So this time my points are spread pretty far out. But if I use a straight edge, I think that I can go ahead and sketch my line. So let's give this a try, see if we can make our line happen here down through our points. And if I kept on going, I'm going to run out of room on my graph here, it looks like, and it looks like we're going to get to about right there. Okay, so I'm all out of room, but I've got my graph of my line. Okay, now we want to look at our equation. Well, we don't quite have everything that we need for our equation, but one thing that we can do from our graph is we can find our rate of change. So, we're in luck. I'm going to go ahead and change colors here. If I go from this point to this point, I'm able to do my rise over my run because I know rate of change is rise over run. And it looks to me like I went up 3 and over 1. So for my equation, which I know is going to start out as y equals mx plus b, I know that my rise over my run here is my m. So I've got up 3 over 1 x. Now I just have to figure out my initial value, which is my b value right here. And notice how this is going to be where this crosses the y-axis. But when we look at our graph, we don't know. It never gets to the y-axis because we run out of space on our graph. But guess what? We can use our rate of change right here that we found to keep going in our table. So my next value on my table would be a 1. And then finally up here would be a 0. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the 0 row of our table because that would tell me a coordinate of 0, comma, whatever it would take to get to the y-intercept. So if this is changing by 3 and by 1, then over here I know that as this changes by 1, this is going to change by 3. Okay, and so I'm just following my pattern backwards here. It looks like I'm going, I'm getting negative, more negative, and so this would be a negative 10. And here's one way that you can check it afterwards. Plug your number in here, and then when it says plus 3, so take negative 10 plus 3, do you get the next number in your cell? And you do. So now if I go this way and I'm going to fill this table in again, I still have my same pattern here of changing by 1. So over here I'm going to continue my same pattern of changing by 3. And so now I'm going to be up here at negative 13. And so negative 13 plus 3, yeah, that's negative 10. So my initial value over here is going to be at negative 13. And so now I have my equation that I can finish up with, okay, by plugging those values in. So sometimes we have to use our table, or we'd have to extend our graph down here, one of the two, so that we're able to figure out how we can proceed forward. Our last way here is if we're given a graph to create a table of values and then write an equation. Okay? So for this one, what I would do, because I'm given the graph already, what I would do is just take these values that are on my graph, these points, and I would plug them in for my table over here for each of the rows. So when I look at the graph right here, I've got this point that is negative 1 and up 7. So negative 1, 7 is going to be part of my table. I've got my 0 row here, 0, 5. My next point over here is at 1, 3. And I think we see some sort of pattern happening here. I'm over here at 2, 1. Okay? So, when I come over here for my equation, remember that rate of change is still rise over run, and I can get that right from my graph. So I can come over here to any 2 points. Let's say I pick these 2 points and I rise. Looks like I'm rising 2. And in this case, I ran negative 1 because when I was here, I was at a value of 2. And when I ran over here to a point which is at a value of negative 1, or I'm sorry, at 1. So I went 1 to the left, or 1 in the negative direction. So for my equation, which is y equals mx plus b, I now know my m value, which is rise over run, and that is 2 over negative 1, and then I've got my x there. For my initial value, this is where this thing is going to cross the y-axis. And so on my graph this time, good news, I can see where it crosses. It crosses right at a value of 5. And so I can put plus 5 right up here, and notice that that's represented here in my 0 row as well of my table. I've got my equation, I was given my graph, and I filled in my table. So it doesn't matter which way we start here. Notice how equations, graphs, and tables, they're all related to each other, and they're all related because of that rate of change and initial value. If you've got questions, please let me know.